Peter is a pioneering Australian artist, manager, and acclaimed event producer. He commenced Peter Rix management in 1972, and over 15 years he managed the careers of Marcia Hines, John English, Richard Clapton, Mark Holden, the rock band Hush, Billy Field, Sharon O'Neill, Anne Kirkpatrick, and many others. A total of 48 platinum and 53 gold albums and 53 gold singles were awarded to the artists managed by Peter in those days. However, it is Peter Rix's creation and chairing of the ARIA Music Awards in 1986, and for the following 14 years, that is his most lasting legacy. Now please welcome Peter Rix.
Thank you very much for the gin and tonic. Good way to start.
My pleasure. I love a good drink on a Friday afternoon. So, Peter, I wanted to talk to you about especially some of the times that that you've reflected back in your life, and I want to start with how you got into the industry from, I hear, such a young age, and I hear that your first party that you threw as a producer was in your high school.
There you go. You have gone and researched it. Yep. So I very happily went to a Nawi Boys High School, and the prefect group and myself in the first year of, the last year of our life together was the first year of the high school certificate. So interestingly, we therefore had 2.5 years of being the senior year. So I think I found my calling at the time without really knowing it. So we convinced the headmaster that he should write a charming note to every girls' school principal within a 20-kilometre radius. And then I headed into town on the train, having fibbed to my mother, and hired one of the bands that used to play in the clubs in town, a band called The Illusions, which is a long time ago. It's in the late 60s. And we would then run these school dances, which by then we'd convinced the headmaster we shouldn't have one a year, we should have one every term, which meant 3. And suddenly there were 300 or 400 girls and just the 90 boys. We never invited any of the boys to go, none of the boys' schools to go. We just had the girls.
Why would you, right?
And once we could pry these lovely girls away from each other because they did like to dance together.
Yeah.
It was a whacking good night we used to have.
I bet.
And that was, I got a lot of fun from that.
So, what kind of made you take the initiative to do that, Because that's not something that, a high school kid essentially says, I'm going to go and try and throw a party.
I was always very happy surrounded by music.
Sure.
So I'm one of the young. I'm the baby boomer that grew up with the Beatles. Like I was 13.
Yeah.
So it was a social phenomena rather than just a music phenomena.
Mm.
And you learn out of the back of that era, as against whether it's Elvis Presley or Bill Haley or whatever was before the Beatles ever arrived, and I don't really care, that you didn't have to follow the norms that were on the table that were provided to you by your parents.
Sure.
And that meant there was an opportunity to do things that required you to be willing pretty early on to say, okay, well, I'm a bit of a risk taker here.
Yeah.
And when you're 17 or 18, there's not much pain, Jack. It's just, am I having a good time? And look at all these girls.
Yeah, absolutely.
And frankly, you're either good at it or you're not going to do it more than once.
Yeah.
So if you're good at it, means you ran out of orange cordial, because that was the one thing that made us money. And as long as you knew how to balance the budget, which meant mum and the parents had to be the security guards.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a overly professional event, but you walk away going, boy, did I enjoy that. And that life, that criteria hasn't changed in my entire life.
When you were doing that, did you have any parents that were, totally against it? Do you have, students and teachers, well, more so teachers that in that time probably said no?
Uh, the the answer is I had a wonderful mother who was supportive and at the same time busy working herself. My father passed away when I was 15, and we sort of nursed him for a few years before he died. So I was a bit on my own. I didn't have what these days you call puberty. My brother and I, my brother's a couple of years younger than me, we from when we were 11 or 12, we knew my father was very ill. And so we were responsible in many ways for him, particularly after school.
Sure.
So yes, you grew up pretty quick. You took on responsibilities pretty quickly, but I don't think for a minute I thought about it at the time. It's just what I did.
Yeah.
Didn't stop me from playing football and basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't stop me. I mean, there wasn't much of it after our social life. I wasn't out partying at 16.
Yeah.
But there's a maturity that you develop when you're caring for someone who is clearly disintegrating that prepares you in some ways for the sort of things, the sort of lessons that you need to have ingrained if you're going to go out and do something where you are in isolation.
Absolutely. So, obviously your dad's death would have affected you to some degree. Did you think about it much when you were a 15-year-old at the time, or did it affect you much?
Good question. We knew he was going to die when I was 12 and my brother was 10 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So we missed him when he passed away, but he was so ill that part of it was really that we were happy that he didn't have the pain anymore. Right. So did I miss him when I was 15 or 16? Pretty much not. I felt like I was a bit bulletproof probably. I missed him awfully when I was in my early 20s.
Sure.
But that was when I really had to decide whether I'd be a lawyer or whether I'd hop in the back of a van and go to Melbourne and become a rock and roll band manager. Right. Now that was a time when, but if I'm terribly honest about it, I used to go for walks and have a chat to him.
Sure.
And that worked. It balanced me out about things. And as I said earlier, when you're that age, there's not really any major ramifications or pain about going off and doing something that if you were 40, someone would sit there and say, what sort of an idiot are you? Because you need to make money.
Yeah.
That wasn't the criteria for doing these things. It was about finding a niche for yourself that gave you
joy. Yeah.
Joy, pleasure, and somewhere in the middle of it all, profit.
Sure.
Don't run away from the profit, Jack. That
of course.
Sooner or later you had to know. I mean, it was never the opening gambit for why to do it. You didn't run a school dance,
no,
or any of the other things that went on.
Yeah,
thinking, gee, we'd better make money here because we weren't going to get it. The school got it.
Yeah. Well, that's that. I think for a lot of people, the things that they do in life, and when they get to the top, I think, many people stop doing it for the money, and most people, I would say, they're not doing it for the money. That's why they can get to the top. And I think if you did just focus on that, I don't think you'd be very good at what you do.
No, I have a great belief in good fortune because it comes along, but it only lasts for a minute.
Sure.
And then the real question after that is how good are you at relentlessly taking that good fortune and moving it to somewhere that then is productive.
Yeah.
I don't. There's a lovely word called serendipity, where lives intersect, occupations intersect. And if you've been lucky enough to build relationships, and that people skills are a big part of my life, then you you get opportunities, and I'm one of those people that usually says yes to most things. So I certainly used to be. And sometimes 50% of the time, saying yes doesn't mean it works. But the other 50% of the time, when it does work, it's a joyous journey forward that shows other opportunities and other ways of growing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, you have to keep an open mind in life. Otherwise, you shut down opportunities, as you said, that present itself.
I never liked people to work with who come to me and say, no, straight away.
Sure.
If they don't want to investigate it, they don't want to go out a bit on a limb, then they're so risk averse that ultimately they're never going to be comfortable around someone like me.
Yeah.
And I'm better off not having
those people.
A business relationship.
Yeah, I think, being open-minded or presenting yourself to uncomfortable situations, that's really where you're going to experience the most growth in life, or the most opportunities, because they're not going to present itself just from you sitting doing what you've always been doing.
If you've got no forward momentum, if you're not rolling down a hill, if you're sitting up the back of the street at the top of the hill waiting for him to come to you, you'll wait forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess that brings us to after your high school.
We could be here for years.
Your little dance. We're not going to go through every moment in your life, but I just wanted to bring up, then after you graduated high school, you went to a university, and as a way to pay for your university fees, you ran an illegal gay dance party in Newtown.
Not in Newtown.
Not in Newtown.
Right smack dab in the middle of King's Cross.
Oh, King's Cross.
Right. Believe it or not, and I apologise now to any of the fathers of the Maccabean Hall, but I didn't own the club. I was one of my friendships had become, because I used to run Suburban Dances.
Sure.
Saturday nights. Didn't have many parties to go to because we used to be out most Saturday nights. And there was a little band that I used to book a lot because I thought they were terrific. And the drummer, my dear old friend Stephen Cafiro, was the driver of car number 1 in the Sydney Vice Squad. And he rang me one night and said, one afternoon, and said, my car's broken down. Can you pick me up? I've got to get my drum kit to the Maccabean Hall in near Green Park, near St Vincent's Hospital. And I went around, picked him up after work, and drove into this Maccabean Hall. He took his drum kit upstairs, and I sat in the back of the room and sat at the back of the hall and waited because I wanted to hear the band play. Had no idea what the gig was. And at about 7:30, after the sound check, in came 1,000 wonderful gay men and women with their eskies, and they had trestle tables that they all went and sat at. And up the band came, and at 3:00 in the morning, when it was all over, it was the best. It was literally the best event, gig I'd ever been to.
Amazing.
And I'm sitting up the back of the room in absolute wonder at how good this thing went. And there was a bloke sitting next to me called Bill Robinson, who I haven't seen for so long, but he was a Newtown, just gently, entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting next to him, and he introduced himself, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm with the band," was my line. And I said, "Mate, this is great." And he said, "Yeah, this is my club." And he ran it, like a committee of men and women. But it was illegal. But at the same time, there was an innocence to it all.
Sure.
And the drag queens, the old drag queens, would get up and sing Mime Shirley Bassey's songs, and the band would play, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm up the back saying, "Mate, King of Rock and Roll, Pete here. You need to get some of these big acts in here. They'll clean up if you play them to us.
Of course.
So the next thing, I'm managing the club for him. And that night, and he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you could get Johnny Farnham in those days, Sadie the cleaning lady, and Colleen Hewitt, who was big, and the Zoot, who you've never heard of, is before you were born. And these were the big 60s sort of acts.
Yeah.
And those television shows, which not many of your listeners will know, but there were a lot of rock and roll shows on the telly, but they were out of Melbourne, mainly Commotion, and It's All Happening.
Did it cross your mind that you might get into trouble for running an illegal gay dance party?
I pretty much learned early on, Jack, not what you know, it's who you know.
Sure.
And so that venue, there were two. There was Friday night was the Aquarius Club. I'm dealing with Sydney history here, and on Saturday night in Petersham there was Chameleons, and they were these two. It was illegal, but they were protected. They were looked after, and there was no harm done. There was never violence. There was never any great intrigue. It was pretty much like it wasn't licensed. There was nowhere to make money other than to charge the entry fee, which was like $5 to get in.
Sure.
And then you had a party. No, I didn't ever think I was going to be hauled off to jail. And I did tell my mother reasonably early on that she might one day get a call from one of her police colleagues. You know, she knew a few people in the game.
Wow. So, that I guess that's the first foray into some of the big acts that you you managed.
Yeah. So the journey, no question, that one of the bands that I then booked was called Hush, 5-piece band in those days.
Yeah.
Sydney teen pop band, cute kids, 17 years old. They were loved, did lots of cover versions, could play all night. And one day they were there on a Friday night and came to me and said, look, we know you've got some sort of legal experience, which was I was studying. You're the only one to know. Can you have a look at this? We've been offered a contract at Warner Brothers. And I had a look at this contract and thought it was appalling, but it allowed them to go and record an album and a couple of singles. So I ended up at their request, absolutely for no reason other than as favour, going up to Warner Brothers and in Artarmon in the Brick Pit, as it was in those days, and finalising a deal for them.
So you must have been, 22?
22. 21, 22, yeah.
So did you not have any fear walking into like a music producing office? Were you not, intimidated? Were you not a little bit nervous?
Yeah, no, I was all those things. Sure. I still do. Depends on where you go, but bullshit gets you a long way, and arrogance gets you even further. And it wasn't that I didn't understand what I was there to do. It was that really, in retrospect, I did a deal for the band that was not as good as I should have been able to do if I'd known more in terms of experience. But what I did understand was they needed somewhere to start.
Sure.
And the agreement was only really for an album. So I didn't think that whatever I sold them down the river in, and they were not unaware. I mean, communication again is, we all talked about it beforehand before they sent me up the road to do it. But you walk into the front door and the first person you bump into is Billy Thorpe and his Aztecs, who are recording for them as well, and they look me up and down as if I was some sort of Trojan horse.
Sure.
But you've got to learn quick if you want to get anywhere, and you've got to be able to cover your ass when because you'll make mistakes. I made lots of mistakes, and you have to be forgiven for it, number one, or else it will fall over. But you'll get forgiven if you're upfront about it. And
absolutely.
So walking in there, I mean, the balance of the story, forgive me, takes too long here, is that Hush went off and we had a budget of $12,000 to go into a studio called United Sound in Sydney. There was a Hush fan club. The fan club was invited to come to the studio for the recording. The album was recorded live in the studio in one day for $12,000. There was a single called Get the Feeling that was recorded not quite at the same time because it was a studio recording in the same place.
Yeah.
Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs had spent $500,000 on their album.
At that time would have been
a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And the Hush album, and I mean, these are things I didn't know, but Warner Brothers, because Hush was barely a blip on their ocean, and the reason that the deal had been done was because the keyboard player in Hush was working as the promo guy at Warner Brothers at the time, so they were doing him a favour.
Sure.
And then Billy's album comes out and stiffs, and Hush's record goes to number 5.
Yeah, that must have been rewarding.
Well, it was like, stick that up, you jumper boys and girls. But again, the band in those days were all had full-time jobs.
Yeah,
and they were that successful in Sydney, but nobody in Melbourne had heard of them. So we had a meeting in my flat, Paddington, the week after it went into the chart, and they looked at me and said, "What do we do now?" And like, I'm the unpaid happy advisor that got them the deal. And the answer for me was, well, I think you're going to have to give up your day jobs and get in the truck and go to Melbourne and become national.
Yeah. And
so they had a little meeting in conclave in the corner, and then looked at me and said, well, we'll give up our day job if you give up yours.
And did you give up your day job?
I gave up. Hopped in the back of the Ford Transit van, and off we went.
Off you went. What a great story. I mean, just going back to, what you said earlier with making mistakes and being able to be forgiven for them. This is something that a lot of people nowadays, with the prevalence of social media and this general outrage when someone does anything wrong, is that there's no chance to be forgiven. It's so hard these days for anyone of any particular public image. The moment they make a mistake, it's just, absolutely being skewered. Even when they do put their hand up and say, hey, look, I made a mistake. We're all human at the end of the day.
Yes. My journey was and remains pretty much around talent, not fame. People who chase fame, often without talent, are never forgiven because the pedestal they're on is made of quicksand.
Yeah,
if you have
that's a good point.
If you have talent, genuine talent, then you will be forgiven. But the truth is, the first person that's got to forgive you is yourself, because self-judgment, evaluation, personal evaluation is one of the matters.
Absolutely.
Good people have to be able to look at themselves, not every day, but you've got to look at yourself every now and then and say, where am I going and what am I doing and am I moving forward? People who find themselves in with colleagues who are unforgiving, they're not colleagues. The reality is they're enemies.
They're probably your detractors.
Correct. They're the ones talking about you while behind your back. They're not saying how good you are. They're going to be saying it whether or not you're good or not. And you don't need them. When you have a journey, I've isolated a few people whose names are well known, but there are just as many and more that are unknown to the general public, but who have just as much knowledge and attention, and who I had great affection for and they for me. And none of it would ever happen without them, because I see most of this life as being, okay, you're willing to stand at the top of the table and go, okay, follow me.
Yeah.
But if you don't have collaboration and you're not willing to go through the dirt and the mud to get there, you're really not going to succeed. None of it comes easy. And the advice, everyone's willing to give you advice, but no one's can walk the walk. You've got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Where did you find the motivation?
Oh, What an interesting question. I have never not found at the end of the day, of the end of a working day where I'm particularly if I'm in the days when I was running 7 and 8 shows a week minimally, you stand at the back of the room, and if you're lucky and it's worked, then you get this rush back at you of people who were happy to be there and who their pleasure is my job satisfaction.
That's great. That's great. I think, not many people in general, I would say actually majority of the people don't really find jobs that, are fulfilling and are satisfied. So in that respect, you discovered what you wanted to do fairly early on.
I not for a minute should I oversell this as being easy or that I just fell into it and how lucky am I? You're attracted to it, whether it's small, large, or in between. You're not attracted to it because it's large and therefore you're going to be famous or this is going to be quick and easy, because it's not.
No.
And for every 3.5 hour, 2.5 hour evening performance on a stage in a town hall in a country town or at the Sydney Entertainment Centre, there are months of pre-preparation that have to be done. And you're either going to wake up in the morning and go, I'm charged, I'm off to do this.
Or you're just going to go,
well, if it destroys you, get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's definitely what I tell people, is that you have to wake up in the morning and go, I want to come to work. I want to go and do things that I want to do. And if it happens to make you, quite frankly, the thing is, it always makes you money eventually doing the things that you love. The question isn't if it's going to make you money or not. It's just a matter of when it's going to make you money.
Look, not everybody, Jack, they don't need to make $1 million.
Of course.
If you're going to win enough money to, and again, know yourself, if you're going to make enough money to pay the rent or meet the repayments, feed everybody, look after the kids, get food and clothing around them. The journey of life is not about how rich you are.
No.
I know more men and women who I call winners in life who are not rich.
Of course.
But by jingo, they're happy.
But they're so fulfilled.
Yeah, correct.
Well, we've just gotten out of 1970s.
Dear me.
Look, I wanted to sort of ask you some questions, or have you talk about some of the parts of you managing artists, right? I think we all have seen artists and what their behaviors are like, especially some of the ones that have gotten fame. But also on the other side, their fame hasn't come just overnight success. It's never an overnight success as per se. People all, even artists, have to go through, disappointments and upset and downs and ups and lows. And you as a manager of these artists, how do you manage that part of it, especially when they're down, and especially when they're, emotionally fragile?
Well, you have to know enough about whoever you're in a business partnership with. As a colleague, you've got to recognise what gives them primarily self-confidence. Because self-confidence is the number one ingredient needed in recording and performance.
In anything, really.
So some people require enough money to pay the rent. Some people just want to be famous.
Sure.
Half the rock and roll bands I knew in the 70s just wanted to make sure they had lots of girls and be seen as a pop star. couldn't care less what went on next year. Everybody has different reasons to become insecure and unhappy.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to recognize what those things are and provide as much of an antidote to it as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think some of those times, you cannot just sit back as a manager and say, well, that's a client of mine and, I'm just going to keep my space, right? Like, I mean, surely at those moments, you are somewhat personally invested in their careers.
Somewhat. Jesus Christ.
A lot, I guess.
Yeah. So I thought you were fishing for my famous quote. Years ago, because I have managed Marcia now for 49 years, and I've never seen her in her underwear. Like literally, she's my friend and we work together very closely. But management is marriage without the sex. Management is you're as close as you can be, but sooner or later they go home to their private life, and that is far more of an issue than anyone who works for you. Elton John toured Australia, and he and his manager saw Mark Holden performing and wanted to sign Mark to Rocket Records.
Yeah,
EMI in Sydney flew Mark and I to London to meet with Rocket Records and John Reid and his manager, Elton's manager at the time, and Elton, and potentially to sign a record deal. Part of the arrangement was, or part of the evolution of us getting to London, staying at the Montcalm Hotel on Marble Arch, was we were invited to an Eagles concert that was being held in Wembley Pool, picked up by John Reid in his Rolls Royce with his driver, taken out to Wembley and watched the Eagles in full catastrophe.
Sure.
Are you sure we should be telling this story, Jack?
Yes.
At least I have Mark Holden, who lovingly these days has always agreed that this is what happened. So we hadn't really had any business meetings at all, but the idea was they would pick us up at the Montcalm, go to the gig, and then go back to Elton's place in Knightsbridge at the time. So comes the encores, and because Elton John's sitting up there on the balcony with us as well with various other people, and comes the encore, and out comes Elton to play piano with the Eagles on a bunch of songs at the end of the performance.
Yes.
And, the place goes berserk, everybody's happy, and then we get hustled into the vehicles to get out of the backstage area where they were parked so we didn't get caught in the crowd.
Yeah.
And off we're heading back to Knightsbridge, and we're in the back of the Rolls Royce, and John Reid, his manager, turns around from the passenger seat in the front and says, "So Mark, what did you think of the gig? What did you think of it all?" And Mark's Australian response was, "Oh, John, I thought it was fantastic. They were great. That little pudgy piano player was a bit raw." And there's a deathly silence in the car. And then John quietly leaned over to the driver, and we were dropped at the Montcalm Hotel 20 minutes later, and we never saw them again.
Didn't return your calls, his calls, or anything?
No. But I've met and spoken many times with John Reid since then, and we have laughed about this a lot.
Look, retrospectively, that must have been, quite amusing now. But at the time, I think, someone like Mark would have been terribly devastated.
No.
Oh, okay.
So Mark is one of those people who will always control his own destiny.
Great.
I was someone that the record company was very happy to have around, because no record company really wants to have the artist sitting in the CEO's office demanding what he wants next.
Sure.
But Mark was more than capable of looking after his own career, really, and has always done that since. What I did was pretty much come home and said, "I don't want to do this anymore."
Yeah, right.
And wandered off, because really, if you can't participate in those sorts of growth issues, what are you doing? Because you're not going to make much of a career move just staying in Australia making pop songs. You've got to be able to globalise it. That's always been the same rule.
Absolutely. So obviously, then you moved on to companies and doing sort of the experimental experience events with brands like Toyota and other global brands.
Mm.
What was that like as a transition from managing these artists to suddenly managing directors?
Most of my working life had been in artist management, and in doing that, in a given year with the roster of artists that I had, we would in any given year be literally putting on stage 800 shows spread across everybody. When a John English went out, it would go out for 7 months and do 6 shows a week, and Marcia would be doing the same. But so was everybody else. It was you grew to learn and understand how to put productions on stage. In that world, people that I would meet because I managed Marcia Hines and John English, 2WS ran a Carols by Candlelight at Parramatta Stadium every year. I ended up producing it for them for the Variety Club. We did it for nothing, but we tried to give it an edge. So instead of just having cabaret acts, we put recording stars on there, and it worked. So it was a silver coin to get in. 50,000 people would turn up. Santa Claus would arrive. John English would sing Christmas carols and a couple of hits. So would Marcia. Tina Arena came. All sorts of wonderful people. And the St. George Bank sponsored it. And the managing director's backstage and said, "Rixie, could you run our marketing event? Because we do it at the moment. We do it at the St. George Leagues Club, and it's pretty boring." There I am. And because part of it is the bravado. You do that sort of thing, don't you? I go, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. Never done it before in my life."
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the journey. And really at 35, most of my colleagues, friends, acquaintances, Chug, etc., were becoming promoters.
Yeah.
Not managers, not agents. They were becoming promoters, and I did not want to be a rock and roll promoter, because what it was, even in those days, was gambling.
Yeah.
I was happier producing, which is what I learned most out of touring. I just never said no, Jack. If the Toyota Motor Corporation rang, which they did, and the head of marketing had heard that he got on the phone and said, "G'day, and I hear you travel and tour acts overseas." And I go, "Yes." Said, "Good, well, I've got a job and in Japan, wondering if you'd like to come out and talk to me." So I went out there and nodded my head and agreed, when, of course, the biggest tour I'd ever taken out was 5 musicians, the lead singer and 4 road crew and me. And I am suddenly in Japan with 800 Australians.
Wow.
Why did it work? Because I had great, wonderful people all around me, all of whom knew what they were doing probably more than I did. But what I had was I just thought it was one job, and it stayed for 30 years.
You really do learn very quickly to sink or swim.
Yeah, and at the same time I was doing that, I'd been a part of the creation of the ARIA Music Awards, and the APRA Music Awards arrived in there somewhere. So I still felt like I had, and I was still managing Marcia, and for a long time I was still managing John. So I still felt I was in the music business, but really my journey was more to move to the left.
That must have been a bit of a, how would I say it, hectic year, right? Or hectic period in your life where you're managing artists, you were producing shows like the ARIA Award show, you were, curating these events for corporate. How did you balance that, life and work?
I was a very bad father. Yeah. So how do you do that?
Well, what did you do?
So this gets detailed now, Jack. So I learnt from the corporates. You don't learn anything in the music business or in theatre or live events really about straight, strict business, the disciplines of business at all. So here I was working for a Japanese car company of serious significance. And so they made me and taught me how to priority manage. And to this day, I still run a priority management system that in current COVID times, it's pretty easy. But what you have to do is treat your life and as a cake, a round cake, and you've got to allocate how much time today, how much time in the normal course of events are you going to sleep for, how much time are you going to give to your work, how much time are you going to give to your family, how much time are you going to give to yourself, and you create these slices, if you like, and you legitimately have to become disciplined enough to deal with it. And then in a given day, you might have 100 things you've got to do. And you've got to find the time. Time is the big deal. To be able to take you've got to evaluate what you've got to do and say, how much of this do I really need to do today? Because everybody wants a piece of you. They all want the answer that minute. But every day, particularly in the mornings, you add more to it.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've got to be able to decide. Some of those things can be moved for a week.
Yeah.
Some of them can be moved, but you move them at the time. So then you're not exhausted by just looking at what you're not getting done. That's what I did.
I mean, how did you manage your, did you have an outlet to manage the stress and the craziness of it all? I mean, a lot of people, I myself, I use exercise as one of my coping mechanisms. What did you use for your coping mechanism in having such a hectic schedule and hectic life? Because you would have been, not only would you been managing the artists in shows in different locations, you would have been managing shows in different locations.
If you ask anybody that knows me, they'll tell you that I don't think I have any stress and that I've managed successfully to not have stress. And if you ask my children, they'll tell you I live with way too much stress.
Yeah.
But I do know that I've always eaten too much. So food has always been my stress outlet, and particularly at night time. And that's the truth. So otherwise, so it's clear, I don't find it stressful to do things that I love.
No.
So in the middle of it all, I learned very early on how to be confrontational. Because if you're not, then you dissipate hours and hours of time being nice to people who you know are idiots, or if not, that they want you to do something that in reality is not going to work. So along the way, and part of it comes from managing artists where I'll give you a small story. In all of the time, in the 49 years I've managed Marcia Hines, for example, and through some extraordinary times and giant success, I've never been backstage after a performance of hers where anyone has done anything else except gush and tell her that she's the most wonderful creature that God ever put on earth and what a wonderful singer she is. No one's ever walked backstage, to my knowledge, and said, gee, I didn't like that show, except me.
Yeah.
And she has a rule, because with the musicians that she has, particularly the ones that arrive new, often the performance will be over and I'll wander backstage and the new bass player will look and say, oh, Peter, what did you think of the show tonight? And the next thing, Marcia will come running in, don't ask him that question, for God's sake, don't ask him. Because 24 hours later or a little later on, you'll ring.
Yeah.
And you'll ring the singer and you'll sit down and you'll go, mate, I didn't like some of that. And this is what I didn't like. And you'll define it cold-bloodedly and objectively. but you can't do it after a performance. You can't tell a chef in the kitchen 5 minutes after he just plated up that you didn't like the main course. Now, maybe you do, Jack. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sometimes hasn't gone down that well.
No.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly won't go down when their entire being has been consumed in preparing that dish or performing that song. So that has been a very handy way of decluttering the stress levels that come when you find yourself rowing down the river against the tide.
Yeah. I mean, that's not an easy skill to learn to be confrontational, because a lot of people aren't confrontational.
No, most people aren't confrontational. They are. They just don't want to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 99% of the world is confrontational.
Yeah,
just they go out the back and then bitch about you when you're gone. That's all. But that's not what I mean by confrontation. It's not whether or not anybody likes you or likes me.
Yeah. It's
about whether what's on the table is good enough for what you need, is going to take whatever it is you're doing forward.
Yeah.
And someone's got to make that decision, because if you commit and put it all into action and you're not sure it's going to work, pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things, from my business experience, is that if you dance around a subject for too long, it ends up being a far worse result than if you just dealt with it at the very beginning.
I've lived through obviously emails, but prior to that, faxes, and before that ticker tape, whatever it was, as forms of communication. So the world is such a closer place now as a result of the changes in communication and the dominance of computerization, and it's made it easier for business in so many ways. And if I had that when I was 22 or 23 and I was working, I would have probably found it in some ways easier. But I categorically know that people are no longer able to cope, and I'm presuming it will change, with the amount of communication that takes place that is both unnecessary and that never gets a response.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether it's Facebook, Instagram, emails, texts, because it's not a letter anymore. But between all of that and the number of times people want to cover their ass by copying you in on something that you don't really need to read, you can spend all day.
Oh, absolutely.
And not get anything done. So you can't turn around to that person who sent you that copy of the email and go, fuck off. Right? You're just not allowed to do that. But what you responding creates even more of the plethora of garbage that surrounds these things. So wading through that absolutely involves confrontation, and that world is where the stress is now.
Yeah.
When you're sitting there surrounded by this stuff, and you're not just, frankly, putting the show on.
Yeah.
So I still get great joy because I don't sit at the back of the room on my jobs and watch the show. I have the headsets on and I basically run the show. I call it, which is in a theatrical sense. And corporate in particular is essentially stressful because you only get 1 day to rehearse, 1 day to load in, set it up, 1 day to rehearse, and 1 day to do the production.
Yeah.
Theatre productions, you get 3 to 6 weeks of rehearsal and then usually a longer run. But the creativity element is the bit that gives you the most satisfaction, is when you know that what you've created has worked.
Yeah.
But getting rid of the garbage around it, hugely difficult job in the modern era.
Just coming back, lastly, to, before when we were talking about family and work-life balance. Look, I know that, you've had some, tragedies in your personal life with your brother passing away, and also later on when your marriage broke down. How did you cope with still being passionate about what you did at work, and also not? I mean, of course, it's going to affect you, those big moments in your life. And what got you through them? Because a lot of people who are listening have gone through family tragedy, breakups, divorce, death, birth, and it affects people differently. And some people are paralyzed by the fact that one of their loved ones have died, or their partners left them, or their marriage broke down, or whatever it may be. Um, you know, that definitely wouldn't have been an easy moments in your life.
The death of my brother was in many ways similar to the death of my father. And without sounding remotely flippant, the death of my father was a practice for the death of Christopher. So again, I watched him disintegrate. He had cancer that came as a result of osteomyelitis, and he was a maniac and one of life's wonderful creatures. But I had a role to play. He had 3 children. He had a wife. There were things to get done, and I mourned him far more after everybody went home. And I didn't mourn in front of anybody. And I think it's my particular way of coping was to just sit in a corner and go, I felt so, and by then it was just me and my mother left.
Yeah.
And then what slowly evolved out of it was, well, that's not really true, because I've got beautiful daughters and had a wife at the time, and that I loved dearly, and they were the reason to live beyond what I did for a living. Yeah. And that's a guiding force still. Divorce is even more painful.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near as painful if you don't have children, but I presume. But I felt categorically like a failure.
Yeah.
That there was nothing I could do with my brother or my dad but care and love them. But I was unable as a human being to provide whatever dear Carmel needed and wanted to remain married to me. And I made her unhappy. And I don't see it's anybody's fault really but mine. If you're lucky enough to find yourself in a situation where I've got an opportunity, you grab it with both hands, don't you? And you try and make sure you don't make the same mistakes
twice. Yeah.
But there are. I don't want this to sound silly, but people like me who are pretty driven aren't the easiest people on the planet to live with. And you got to share me with a whole bunch of other people, and not everybody's wants to do that.
Yeah.
There's a degree of ownership that in a relationship they want that often comes from it being them wanting it to be the center of their life. I probably have a broader escarpment that we all have to live on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible what us as people can work through, and to get over loss or get over tragedy, and to still come out the other side. I mean, of course, not a lot of people can get through it, unfortunately. But those who do come out the other side, hopefully for the better, hopefully have learnt a thing or two. And it's just really a matter of looking forward and keep on putting the next foot in front of the other. That will actually get you through.
Every year between Christmas and New Year, every year since I was my early 20s, I find time, and I don't mean an hour, I mean a couple of days, when nobody else is around and the phone doesn't ring.
I love that period too.
to look at the last 12 months, to examine what's gone on, and really to look at myself and say, so are you a winner or a loser this year? Excuse me. Have you grown? Have you evolved? What's happened? And having children is it's an amazingly significant moment in that journey. So you do get, they are positive elements to it all. In doing that, I accept that not everybody, not every human being is resilient enough to be strong enough to look at themselves and be that honest. And at the same time, willing to, as we talked about, have confrontation. People should be allowed to do whatever it is that makes them happy and good and rolling down the road. But if they're all searching for the golden fleece that gets them to the next stage, if they think that anybody can give it to them other than themselves, then they fail to grasp how the world actually doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And it never has. So if you're willing to stand up and hold your hand in the air and start moving forward, it's amazing who comes along for the ride afterwards. But you've got to be willing to make them your colleagues and your friends and not someone that's just working for you.
Sure.
That evaluation of self
yeah,
is not about whether you made a lot of money. It's such a personal statement that only you need to know about, that says, well, where have I been? Where have I gone to? And what's the last piece of the puzzle? What are we going to do next year? What are my ambitions? And then you don't have to look at it again until you get to the end of the year and say, well, this is what I said I was going to do. And what parts of it did I get done? Now, that so much of that is about your life and self as a human being, not about whether you made a lot of money. I think the money follows.
Absolutely.
If you've got the balance right.
That's, yeah. I am a true believer of that too.
And again, 4/5 of the people probably listening to this earn a salary. If they're happy and they're making a salary and they've got a life that can structure around it, isn't that wonderful? But the pressure on their life these days is infinitesimally more than it probably was when I was the same age as they are now. And I watch it because I know they can't control it. You know, they can't make it better. It's not just about whether COVID-19's arrived. It's about the job itself and their contribution to it all. But inside every job like that, what you really want to do is move up the tree. Yeah. And if you do want to move up the tree, the same principles arrive. You don't have to be working for yourself to do it. If the business benefits substantially from it, and you're able to play the politics, you'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, again, even when you do get into those leadership positions, you still have to be okay with yourself.
Yeah, and you know, if you get to a leadership position, you're probably going to be better at doing it than I am. Because I don't. I mean, if you're in a leadership position in any sort of mid-range company, it's that having 150 or 200 people work for you is nightmare.
It's a tough gig, man. Yeah.
Tell me about it. And therefore, who are the people that you trust around you that you've built? And how do you keep them comfortable, happy, and ambitions? Communication, big deal. We may have talked about most of it, but I so passionately believe that round one is you've just got to be brave. And number two is you just have to like yourself and believe in yourself. And if you've got those three elements in place and you're constantly looking at who you are and where you're going, then the quality that I haven't mentioned but that they need more than anything else is relentlessness.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Keep going.
Never give up.
It's when somebody comes to you and says, no, we can't do this. It's not available. And you've got to be able to go, give me a look at that. Let's go online. And then eventually, to the horror of the person who said no, you'll find a way.
Yeah. Then
you know why it's lonely at the top. I have always called what I do the loneliness of the long distance runner.
It's my so true.
It's my little line.
It's so true.
And it comes from all those years of rock and roll where at the end of the gig at 11:30 at night, when the audience had left and gone home and the band were all sitting in the dressing room having their beers, someone has to pay the roadies to get the petrol to get the truck to the next job. And someone has to turn the lights out and lock the back door.
Yeah.
And the person who's got to do it has to be sober and willing to say, okay, it's my job. And it's lonely. If you get lonely and you don't like being on your own as you walk, because the band are all pissed, the roadies are all hoping that there's a few girls left, and the Country Comfort Motel in Dubbo is not the most attractive place on earth to be having a late night canapé and a gin and tonic. No. So if you understand your life is like that, then your expectation isn't that's what's going to make you happy. But if you don't want to be lonely, if you don't want to be in charge, if you don't want to be at the top of the tree, it's not a problem. It's no big deal as long as you still relentlessly get yourself to where it is that you know you fit. And how do you do that? Know yourself.
Great words. The great Mr. Peter Rix. Peter, how do we reach you on your socials, on your
I don't have socials.
Websites?
I never have. Oh, websites?
Yeah.
You can do all that. Rix, peterrixmanagement.com.au. Don't send me a Facebook. I won't know what to do with it. Don't send me an Instagram. I know even less about what to do with it. But if you go online, you're going to find me in a flash.
And also, of course, you have your own podcast series, From the Inside. And please go check out some of the podcasting some stories from the music industry. Some of them are
all of the maniacs that we've just been talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Jack, a privilege to be here.
Thank you.
Nice to chat.